So there is yet another story for cherry pickers all around this nation, for race baiters to grift on in order to extract money and political capital from, and I am fascinated by exactly how little of a story this case actually is, especially when you look into it. And there's not even a cover-up that's interesting to talk about or debate about, because the Minneapolis Police Department actually released the body cam footage in full, in slow motion, and in regular speed almost immediately after the shooting, so there's really nothing to talk about. But of course, since it was a black person that was killed by the police, none of that matters, and now we see headlines about how the cops executed or murdered somebody in about 9 seconds. And whenever we're talking about ridiculous, insane coverage of the police, anti-police propaganda, race baiting to the maximum, we have to go to our tried and true professionals, the Young Turks, because their video is absolutely insane, and it's even more insane than the stupid narrative that's being promoted all over Twitter and in most of the left wing, because the Young Turks gotta go harder on those racial issues because they committed to this lie so greatly. There's no way they can be caught out-lefted by somebody else when it comes to the issue of race. But today, we have a sponsor. It's about your heating in your winter, so we're going to go over to that. Then we're going to go to the Young Turks video. Then we're going to talk about all the things that they're wrong about. A ton of Americans last month were talking about how their heating bills were up almost $100. This is largely due to the fact that natural gas heating is up 32% this winter as compared to last winter, and heating oil ain't doing much better. This is one of the reasons why I highly recommend stay winter warm. You can get yourself a little mini space heater that's absolutely perfect for small rooms or to supplement your heat. We all got those drafty rooms in our households, and it doesn't make sense to crank up the thermostat for every room in the household just to get that one to the temperature where it's comfortable. Go to staywinterwarm.com right now and you can get yourself 50% off this heater. Don't know about you, but I'm not looking forward to lining the pockets of the utility companies this winter, and you shouldn't be either. So obviously one of the first things that I like to harp on is the titles used, because that can tell you a lot about the mindset of the people presenting you this content. And the title is "Cops Murder Black Man in No-Knock Warrant Raid." Of course, murder and black are very key choice of words, because again, if the person wasn't black, nobody would care what the police did in this instance. It wouldn't be a national story. The reason why we know that for sure is because the police kill twice as many white people every single year, and almost none of them ever become a national story. And of course, the murdered adjective, even though in no way, shape, or form was anything involved in this case a murder. A murder is a premeditated act of killing. This was a killing, and it was in response to a suspect pulling out a gun and pointing it at the police. And by the way, the Young Turks are going to dispute whether the gun exists. They're going to dispute whether it was pointed, because even if it did exist, it definitely wasn't pointed. And they're going to talk a lot of nonsense, but I assure you, and I will prove to you by the end of today, that the gun existed, it was in the guy's hand, and it was pointed at the officer. But let's get into their video. Maybe they're going to sway us. Maybe they're going to teach us a lesson about how America is so racist and racist or whatever. Let's catch their side before I give you my side, aka the correct side.
Body cam footage released today shows the moment that a no-knock police raid by the Minneapolis police resulted in the almost immediate murder of a 22-year-old black man named Amir Locke.
First and foremost, as is in the title, of course, John Adirola leads off with the most important information, which is black man, and call it a murder. Murdered black man got murdered. Police murdered a black man. Make sure I emphasize that propaganda, even though, again, this meets no definition of murder. It's just not the case. And the fact that this guy was black is irrelevant. If you point a gun at the police and you're white during a raid, you will be shot by the police. This happens twice as often every single year as it does to black people. But whatever, John, whatever you want to say. And then they roll into the video. So obviously I had to cut the video before the actual shooting happened due to the fact that YouTube has their terms of service and I need to be compliant with them. but you actually see the gun quite clearly in this video, which is a slow motion video, before the shots are fired at this person. Now, I don't know why the Young Turks ended up going with the slow motion version of the video, because the actual video is about 9 seconds long, and they actually make comments about how the Minneapolis police strangely didn't release video in real time, which is just a pointless and stupid lie. Obviously, this is a slowed down video. They released both of them in tandem, and if you wanted to watch it in regular speed, this is about half speed, or if it's about a third speed, you can actually do this crazy thing where you speed up the video in editing. So John's point here is just stupid.
Obviously, that footage was slowed down. I don't know exactly why it was released that way, but that is the way that the video has been released.
But he makes it anyway.
So devastatingly, in the same area where police killed George Floyd using the same technique that resulted in the death of Breonna Taylor, another individual has been killed.
So first and foremost, the idea that this happened in Minneapolis, this happened in Minnesota, the same area where George Floyd died, has no bearing on what happened in this case, or at least if it does, it's not in the way that John Iadarola is referring to it. Because after the death of George Floyd, the Minneapolis City Council went absolutely crazy. Their cowardly, weak mayor, who's basically a weaker version of Justin Trudeau, I didn't know that could actually exist, but believe me, we'll do a video later on about the press conference related to this and how he got run over by somebody who's theoretically in his employ because that person was a black woman. It was crazy. It's for another time. But murders have been up ever since they didn't back the police up, or they defunded the police partially and they fired the commissioner or the chief of police in that city. So they're looking for a murderer here. And by the way, this isn't known at the time to the Young Turks, so I don't want to be unfair to them for not knowing this information. Turns out the murderer that they're looking for is actually the person who got shot's cousin. So they're in the right place, they're in the right area. This guy happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time because his cousin was a murderer and he killed somebody and he was on the run. So that is responsible for this more than any other factor. But also, John Iadarola immediately puts forward the myth of Breonna Taylor, which is often put forward in association with this because this is technically a no-knock raid. So everything about this, absolutely everything about what John Iadarola just said there is 100% wrong. Remember, the Breonna Taylor case was not a no-knock raid. There was not Breonna Taylor sleeping when she was killed. These two things aren't connected. In fact, the only thing that is connected in the Breonna Taylor case and in this case is that a black male in that instance pointed a gun at the police. In the Breonna Taylor case, he shot the police officer in his femoral artery, and that's why the police shot back. In this instance, the police didn't let this guy get a chance to fire off a round, but he drew a gun. By the way, the Breonna Taylor case, they broke down the door after they knocked and tried to execute the warrant as a standard warrant. It was not a no-knock warrant, or even if it was a no-knock warrant, the decision was made in the staging area not to execute it like a no-knock warrant. And in the Breonna Taylor case, had they just broken down the door, Kenneth Walker would have not had time to walk to the hallway, pull out his gun, and be able to fire on the officer. So ironically, if it was a no-knock raid, Breonna Taylor would likely still be alive, but it's also just not the case that anything the Young Turks is saying is true. And by the way, it turns out the house in the Breonna Taylor case was the correct house. It was what they were under surveillance. It was the place they were looking for. So all those comparisons make no sense at all. Also, the door wasn't broken down here. The first thing you see is the police turning the key. So any connection to Breonna Taylor case is a mythical connection based on the myth of Breonna Taylor and the myth that is being made related to this case. And by the way, I'm starting to think that maybe the Young Turks didn't show you the actual video in real speed, which I'm going to have to show you, because you would hear the police screaming for the 10 seconds that it's a police, that it's search warrant, and all that nonsense. That's kind of obscured with the slow motion, so maybe you don't know what's actually being said, and you don't get a sense of how much time and how loud the police were when they entered this place, and how many times they shouted police before Amir pulled out his gun and pointed it at the officers.
We want to give you a little bit more information about this. Importantly, he was not the individual that they were even there for. That, of course, would not justify what you saw in the video, but they were not there for him.
They were there for his cousin, John. They were there for his cousin, the murderer. That's who they were there for. And he was sleeping on the couch in the apartment, probably the cousin's apartment, and that's why the police were there. And he had a gun, and he pointed the gun at cops.
They'd been carrying out a warrant on Wednesday morning for the St. Paul Police Department's homicide unit. Chief Huffman of that unit said that officers had a warrant for 3 locations in the apartment complex, and that Amir Locke was not named in the original warrant. Now, Locke did have a gun in his hand, according to police. And according to police.
According to police.
But it's unclear whether he was aware that police officers had entered his apartment. And that is buttressed by the fact that he had just woken up seconds earlier, had not done anything wrong, was legally allowed to have that gun, and only in a case like this where it's a black man being killed would any conservative argue that he shouldn't have had a gun in his hand if he didn't want to be immediately executed by the police.
So the way that the left is attacking this, and this is not just the Young Turks, but of course is presented in the Young Turks, it's essentially not only a racist issue, but a conservative hypocrisy issue, because this guy had a gun, he pointed the gun at the police, so basically because conservatives say you should have a gun to defend your home, or it's good for you to have a gun to defend your home, therefore he shouldn't have been killed for pointing the gun at the police, and you're a hypocrite if you say that that's the reason why he was shot by the police, even though it clearly is. No, wrong, incorrect, not even close. Thanks for playing. You can go home now. You see, in the Kenneth Walker case, Kenneth Walker firing on the police officer and hit an officer in the femoral artery is the reason why the officers returned fire upon him and ultimately ended up killing Breonna Taylor. Now, because Kenneth Walker convinced the police, or convinced the prosecution, or convinced the press, who ended up putting pressure on the prosecution, whatever combination of events you want to go with, that he didn't know that the police were coming to his door at the time, which, by the way, I actually don't disbelieve. That's why he ultimately ended up having the charges against him being dropped. So if we were in a scenario like this, where Amir Locke is not the person and he had survived, but he had wounded an officer, and this has happened multiple different times, and this has happened with multiple different black people, he would not have been charged, especially in Minneapolis, where everybody's super woke when it comes to the police, and where the gun apparently, allegedly, is legal in that scenario. But he didn't survive because it's an incident where the cops have a right to be there, he has a right to defend himself, and if those come into conflict, nobody is going to be charged. Had he killed an officer in that situation, there is a chance that he wouldn't be charged. But if you're an officer and you're serving a warrant on a place where you expect to find a murderer, somebody who murdered somebody not too long ago, it is acceptable when you are presented with a gun pointed right at you for you to fire upon this person. Now, there's an overall conversation about whether or not a no-knock warrant would have been appropriate in this scenario, and that's interesting to have in terms of policy, but remember, the Young Turks are making the case that this was a murder. They're making the case that the gun being pointed at the officers was not justification, and they're trying to make the case that there's some kind of conservative hypocrisy because conservatives believe in individual gun ownership, but they also think that if you point a gun at an officer can defend himself against you, just like anybody can defend themselves against you when you point a gun at them, because that is a dangerous act. You don't have to wait for the gun to be fired. In fact, in reality, you don't even have to wait for somebody to grab the gun and get their hands on it. Just reaching for it or reaching for a weapon is enough to make a self-defense claim. You don't have to get killed in order to defend yourself. That's ridiculous in every way.
Yeah, so first of all, there's two potential scenarios here, and I think I know why they released the video in slow motion and regular speed. And I watched it in both, and I think that they did the slow motion one so that you have a better chance of seeing the gun. And I didn't see it in the regular speed one, but I think I might have seen it in the slow motion one. It's hard to tell.
So this is one of the reasons why I absolutely hate the way the Young Turks cover these stories, because this statement that Cenk made might sound innocuous, but it's actually a very dangerous, pernicious lie that Cenk is using intentionally in order to shade doubt on the facts that are clearly not in dispute in the case. If you look at the still image of the video, he had a gun in his hand. It is not disputed that he had a gun in his hand. He pointed the gun at the cops. People want to dismiss that or say that that didn't happen or whatever, even though you see the cops fanning out early in the video and he's pointing it in the direction. And again, if you're pointing it low at the cops, it's not like you have to point it at their heads before it's dangerous and you can actually respond. But Cenk is saying, oh, I think I saw it. He's vaguing up things that are not in dispute, facts of the case, in order to cast more doubt on the cops. Every single thing that is in dispute that's non-factual based, Cenk will assert as an absolute fact if it's on his side, but when it's not even murky, when it's not even in dispute, Cenk is vaguing it up, and that's incredibly deceptive. For instance, they're saying that he was just woken up, and you're going to hear this repeatedly, 2 seconds before he was shot, even though they enter the home and they start yelling police search warrant, 9 seconds before, or under 10 seconds before, he ultimately ends up being shot by the officers. So they're just going to take everything for granted that you cannot possibly know for their side while vaguing up factual information because they're incredibly deceptive.
So the two scenarios are he has a gun and he doesn't have a gun. So in the one where he doesn't have a gun, it's the most outrageous killing you've ever seen. They wake the guy up and they say 10 seconds, but most of it was outside opening the door. But when they enter the apartment, it's only 2 or 3 seconds and then boom, he's dead. They shoot him. If he doesn't have a gun, it's the most outrageous shooting you've ever seen. Walk into a guy, wake him up, and execute him, right?
So right here, Cenk is lying, and this is one of the reasons why I believe the Young Turks decided to go with the slow motion video, because if they don't show you the normal speed video, you can't get a sense of time. Cenk says after they entered the apartment, it was like 2 or 3 seconds. That's just not true.
Police search warrant! Police search warrant! Police search warrant!
You can watch the video for yourself. It's under 10 seconds. In fact, a lot of lefties are saying 9 seconds, that's not enough time, but Cenk has to speed up the timetable in order to make it more palatable to his audience, because he's selling his audience a narrative of evil, murderous police officers that just went in and executed him as soon as they knew he was black. Also, again, he's talking about a hypothetical where he didn't have a gun. The family doesn't dispute that he had a gun. The video shows him having a gun. I know Cenk's like, I couldn't even see it, but we've heard this before. He said Gage Grosskreutz in the Kyle Rittenhouse case, he had no idea he had a gun until a day before Kyle Rittenhouse was found not guilty, despite the fact that he testified in the case that he had a gun and videos were available that night that he had a gun. Cenk couldn't see it because Gage was a left-winger. Cenk can't see the gun here because this guy's a black guy, and again, just speeding up the timetable, speeding it up, trying to make the police more murderous, trying to gin up more hysteria, because that's the kind of guy Cenk Uygur is.
If he doesn't have a gun, it's the most outrageous shooting you've ever seen. Walk into a guy, wake him up, and execute him, right? And execute him, right? And execute him, right?
If you don't think Cenk is being deliberate in the way that he's spreading anti-cop propaganda, just listen to the words that he's using. Listen to the word that he was going to use before he stopped and switched to execute. He was going to say shoot, which is the more neutral term. This is something that somebody who's actually questioning an event would likely use, but instead he switched it to execute, to add in intent, add in hate in the heart of the cops. The cops just shot this guy who may or may not have had a gun. I mean, what even is video evidence? What even is an indisputed fact by both sides of this case? He may or may not have had the gun in his hand. That's not even what's being argued about right now, but I'm just going to vague that up. But the cop executed him. He executed him in 2 to 3 seconds. That's what Cenk is doing right here. It's incredibly deceptive, and considering lies, misinformation, and all this hysteria around the police led to the most destructive riots in American history in the year 2020, which the Young Turks supported, it's incredibly dangerous what he's doing. But of course, this is glorified on YouTube. The left wing gets supported, and you're going to be allowed to crowdfund and all this for this criminality, but that trucker convoy in Canada, GoFundMe needs to take that away and actually appropriate their money and give it to other causes that they support, likely like Black Lives Matter rioters.
But if he does have a gun, to John's point, right wing, be really careful about whose side you're on. Because if you say the police can come into any house, wake you up, and you have no idea who they are. I mean, that guy had about a second when he woke up. And then if you reach for your gun that you have perfectly legally in this country, the police can instantly execute you. That is a very, very dangerous standard.
The ridiculousness in the way that Cenk is trying to frame this just goes to show how little he understands about the other side. First and foremost, nobody is saying that the police can enter any household that they want at any given time, wake you up and kill you if you present your gun. That's ridiculous in every way. There was a warrant in this case. The reason why there was a warrant is because they were looking for a murderer. The murderer, by the way, turned out to be this guy's cousin. Likely not a coincidence, but whatever, no big deal. The police came in, they announced, they gave time for this guy to respond. He started funneling around under the blankets. He grabbed his gun, pointed at the officers, he got shot. That's what happened. You want to say it's tragic because this guy appears to not be a suspect, not be involved in any way, shape, or form? Sure, but this is not an instance of an execution or not an instance where the police did anything invalid. Again, it could have easily been the scenario where this guy was the murderer because, again, he was the cousin of the person who ended up being killed in this instance, and he fired upon the officers. You don't have to wait to be shot and killed before you can defend yourself. This doesn't make a danger standard. This is not contradictory to the Second Amendment in any way, you have no point, Cenk. You're not making a good argument, yet you're making your goofy faces and you're about to call everybody you disagree with racist. You know it's coming.
That is a very, very dangerous standard, and actually would put, if our entire system wasn't obviously and overtly racist, it would put the right wing in greater danger than anyone else because they have more guns. Of course, they think, nah, they'll just shoot black people with it, they won't shoot me. That'll be largely correct statistically, but sometimes they'll shoot you too.
Cenk, it's not true statistically. People do not say, oh, well, my Second Amendment, don't worry about it because they're only going to enforce the anti-Second Amendment stuff against black people. You just made that up in your head. And no, it's not largely true that mostly black people get shot. Twice as many white people get shot because they have guns, because they're reaching for guns, for all the same reasons. You just never cover those stories because those stories aren't interesting, because if you put white man killed by the police, nobody would click on it, nobody would gin up hysteria, nobody would be allowed to riot over it. But you put black man in there because you want to racialize everything, and that's who you are as a person. That's how you view the world, Cenk, and you're trying to project it on everybody else.
You know, it just seems even far more egregious than what happened to Breonna Taylor, just by virtue of the fact that this individual didn't have any time to react, to respond, to really do anything, and they had moved so incredibly quickly, sleeping again, and it's just wrong location, every bit about it.
You could say this is worse than the Breonna Taylor case because in the Breonna Taylor case, that was the correct house. The police knocked and announced. Kenneth Walker fired on the cops, and the cops were defending themselves against the shot fired that nearly killed one of their officers. But she's not making this point, and she's talking about wrong location and all that stuff. We don't know that at all. First of all, they had a warrant for 3 separate apartments in that complex where the suspect might have been hiding. This was one of those places. There is no indication at all whatsoever that this was a wrongful address, and this guy is the cousin of the murder suspect. So this is wholly made up by this woman. Just because this isn't the suspect name on the warrant, that doesn't mean that they were in the wrong location. So she just made that up. Let's be clear about that. And her connection to Breonna Taylor, again, is frivolous because she doesn't understand the facts of the Taylor case, nor does she care about that, because these cases only matter in the way that you could promote anti-cop hysteria and claim black victimhood.
And, you know, it's something that seems to happen so incredibly often, especially in Minneapolis, where the black population is, 19%, yet we're 66% of the people that police kill.
Yeah, that's because black people commit the most crimes and black people commit way more murders, so they present way more dangers to police. You would not expect them to be statistically in line with their population when their behavior is totally different from their rates of their population. And to deny this reality is to deny the existence of cause and effect. Of course, they would get killed way more. They're way more violent against the police, and they attack the police way more, and they attack each other way more. That's what's going on. I mean, this whole thing was started off by this guy's cousin killing another person. That's what triggered these whole events. So it was black crime that led to the death of the criminal's cousin.
It's wild to me that we still live in a country that continues to allow this behavior and to condone it, but it's just, I don't even know what to say. It's disgusting. And this 22-year-old man lost his life. And now we are going to be now in the space of social media of essentially debating his humanity.
So that's absolutely a worthless non-addition to the conversation. It added nothing. We are all dumber for listening to this person talk. And one of the reasons why is because she can't make a rational case based on the facts of the case. She has to ignore them, obfuscate them in order to make her points. She said, I can't believe we live in a country where this can happen. What are you talking about? This guy pointed a gun at the cops. Do you think that the cops should allow him to fire the gun at them before they respond? Is that the argument you want to make? Then say that out loud. Otherwise, don't even try this nonsense, vagaries, and like all these platitudes. Also, she denies cause and effect, as we went over earlier. And again, it's just not adding anything of substance to the conversation because she can't address the point. Also, tons of misinformation in there, like they were at the wrong apartment. That was never alleged. It was always said that he was not the suspect that they were looking for. And the whole thing about debating somebody's humanity is just not true. When we debate the actions of the person, that's because you guys immediately take the position position that we have an innocent angel didn't do anything wrong, or was the wrong house, or whatever, and people talk about what actually happened because those are the factors in the case. It's not dehumanizing to talk about the behavior of the person prior to them being killed if that behavior contributed to them being killed. What is dehumanizing is taking away all agency from the participants in their own lives, and that's what the left does constantly, and that's what she does constantly, and that's what she was doing when she was doing that crime denial tactic of saying black people only make up 19% of Minneapolis's population, yet they make up 66% of those killed by police. Well, yeah, they're disproportionately committing way more murders than other people in the city of Minneapolis, so that's not surprising at all, unless you're trying to deny all agency to these people.
Yeah,
Exactly. There should be no debate whatsoever.
Yeah, you like that, John. No debate whatsoever. You like to be able to assert your absolute garbage analysis, your misstatements of facts, your denial of the facts that we can see in the video, like the gun being present, like the fact that this guy's cousin was the person behind the warrant. So you could say there's no debate, there's nothing to discuss. But in reality, what John was actually responding to here, and it just goes to show you where his mind is at, how low level analysis this guy is actually capable of. And I know that sentence was a little wordy or messed up in the wordies, but it doesn't matter, is that John is saying there should be no debate on whether or not he was human. Well, congratulations, John. There is no debate on whether or not he was human. What we're debating is whether or not pointing a gun at the officers is something that the officers can respond to, or they're just supposed to take a couple shots before they determine that maybe this guy was sleeping a little bit too hard when he's firing at the officers. I mean, I'm bleeding out, but as long as this guy is awake and adamant that he is fully awake, then it's okay. Then it's all kosher. Also, did I mention that it's 2 seconds now? We're just compressing time for the convenience of the Young Turks analysis.
The right wing, I am going to guess, is just not going to touch this because they know it puts them in a possible position, because they want cops to continue to do stuff like this to people like Amir Locke specifically, but they don't want to answer any of those questions about guns.
John, I just answered all your questions about guns. You don't want to answer any questions about reality. This is why you're vaguing up the details of it. And people on the right who don't want to take this case, who don't want to address these issues, are cowards. It's not even difficult. What the Young Turks have posed aren't even thought-provoking questions. I'm actually half asleep, ironically, while I'm covering this story, while I'm responding to this, and I'm taking apart their points at each and every level. They're not talking about conflicts and rights. They're not talking about any issue that is big-brained or high-level IQ. They're being dumb and they're whining, and John is saying, there shouldn't be a debate about whether or not a black person is human, as if that's actually a debate going on in this country. You're the ones who can't answer any of these questions. You're the ones who can't acknowledge reality. You're the ones who have to do all sorts of deceptive tricks and time compression and all that nonsense in order to communicate your points, because you're the ones who know you're in the wrong.
And yet they're perfectly fine with Amir Locke being put in a position where he has to wake up and in a second decide, there are people breaking down my door yelling at me. I can either shoot, and if I don't, and they are just random people, they might kill me, or if I even look like I might be a threat and they're cops, they'll definitely kill me. So you have a quarter of a second to make that decision. And in a second decide, there are people breaking down my door. There are people breaking down my door.
John, the first thing in the video is them turning the key. They didn't break down the door. The first thing this person would have heard is them yelling, police search warrant, police search warrant, police search warrant for about 10 seconds.
Police search warrant! Police search warrant! Police search warrant!
So again, you can't make your case without lying about what we can see on the video. Your whole argument rests on the idea that we shouldn't believe our lying eyes, and I'm not here for it. I'm not about to do it, and you're not gonna slip that by us. We saw the video early on, it was played. Let me show your version of the video where you have them turning the key and entering the place. They yell police multiple different times. The idea that they were woken up by the door being broken down is made up by you, John Idarola, because you can't debate in the realm of reality. You have to add fantasy into it.
There's not a right winger in the world that thinks that that is acceptable to put a conservative in that position, a white person in that position, And they're not going to be able to say that. And so I have a feeling they're just not going to touch this with a 10-foot pole.
John, I know this is hard for you to understand, but twice as many white people are killed by the police every single year than black people. I know you don't know that because you cherry pick or you go based off of other people cherry picking stories because you're too lazy to actually do the cherry picking on your own. And this scenario happens more to conservatives than it does to lefties because conservatives are more likely to sleep in reach of their gun. Now, the scenario where your cousin murders somebody and the police are coming looking for your murderous cousin, maybe that does happen more often to black people because black people commit disproportionately far more murders than white people. And in terms of raw numbers, in some years, more in raw numbers than white people. But overall, this happens to conservatives. And in that situation, I don't expect the police to say, oh, this guy's pointing a gun at me. I guess I shouldn't shoot him because he might have political beliefs that agree with the right wing. You just made that up, John. Nobody makes that point. And the fact is, nobody even argues about the case if it is a white person. It doesn't make national news. It barely makes local news. The video doesn't get released immediately. And people don't start crying about it until way later, unless it's way more egregious. And even then, that's not a big deal. It's nowhere near the scale. Name 5 white prominent cases of police killings that you know of off the top of your head without looking any up. And spell all the names correctly in the chat. I'll be Googling them to work it out.
Yeah, last couple of points here. First, if you're thinking, really, Minneapolis again? Again, it's in Minnesota? That's George Floyd and about half a dozen massive nationwide discussed cases all coming out from the same state. Gee, I wonder if there's a problem with the training of the police officers. Nope, we're never gonna fix it. Never, ever going to fix it. Not just in that state and then that city, but all across the country.
The training of the police officers is a total non-point. It's not relevant. It doesn't make anything related to this case any different because Cenk has no specifics on how they should be trained differently. Again, the officer had a gun pointed at him. Every one of them saw the gun. The gun is on video. I know Cenk is denying the existence of the gun, or at least partially denying it, so he can get out of actually taking the position that the gun wasn't there. If you have a gun pointed at you, are you not allowed to defend yourself against the gun that's pointed at you? Is that not allowed in the United States of America? Is that something that Cenk Uygur is going to out-train? Remember, Cenk Uygur said he could beat up Joe Rogan, so maybe Cenk Uygur has some secret judo move that he would have used in that scenario, you know, calling bullets and all that stuff. Maybe he was going to stampede them with his buffalo strength. Who knows? I don't know. But maybe Cenk has something, and if he does, he should share it with the police. Spread the wisdom. Instead of telling people that you know for sure how to do their jobs better than them, why don't you actually share that great wealth of knowledge that you're holding in your heart, Cenk, about how to train these police? And by the way, the other instances, the other very public instances in Minneapolis, only one of them, and I mean one of them, had anything to do with training at all, and that was the Chauvin case. But the Chauvin case, they didn't bother to make about the training. They made it about Derek Chauvin, the individual, because even when they say it's about training and it's about process, that's not the case. They just want to condemn individual officers and police as a whole. These are not solutions-oriented people. These are burn-it-down-oriented people, which is why they supported people like Antifa. Look at the one with the Dante Wright, where the cop accidentally shot that person. That's not a training issue. They put the gun and the taser on the opposite side for a reason. She ended up grabbing her gun by mistake. It happens. It's unfortunate. She ended up getting convicted over it. But again, it's not like you're going to train them any better to not in a heat of the moment situation reach for the wrong object. You do all you can by putting them on both sides, and hopefully people don't reach for the wrong side. But that's not a training issue. Cenk, you have no point. There's nothing here involved in training. This could be a policy issue, but again, they don't want to address that because why bring up an actual solution to a problem if it's not even related to this? And that problem would have been no-knock warrants in this scenario.
And to John's point about the right wing, it's not just marauders, John. It's their number one fantasy is that jackbooted thugs of the tyrannical government come to their door, which I always explain is the police, and then they get to murder the cops. Are you sure you're gonna be able to pull the gun fast enough? He was killed in about 2 seconds once they enter the apartment.
Again, the Young Turks obsess over false details related to all these cases or irrelevant details, but in this case, it's absolutely false. Watch the video for yourself. Tell me if it was 2 seconds or closer to 10.
Police search warrant! Police search warrant! Police search warrant! Hands! Get on the ground! Get on the fucking
It was 10. The police announced police search warrant multiple different times. Cenk is getting a response from Twitter because they arbitrarily decided to start the count from when one of the officers kicked the couch, and they said that was about 2 seconds, and Cenk is mistaking that with the cops entering and shooting 2 seconds after they entered. Again, just not real in any way, but Cenk's whole argument rests on the fact that he can't tell the truth. Was there a gun? Is the gun imaginary? It was just 2 seconds. You can't determine if there was a gun in 2 seconds. I'm Cenk Uygur. Let me tell you about the police training and how they need to fix the training, and I could tell you how to do it, but I'm not going to tell you because I'm the greatest expert ever, but I can't tell you.
And by the way, he did, if the cops are telling the truth, he did pull the gun and then he was killed. So how are you gonna fight them? Are you gonna be awake all night waiting for the cops? And then as soon as they come, you're gonna go kill the cops before they kill you? This is madness, this is insanity. We can't live like this.
So Cenk is talking about how the right wing has fantasies about how they're trying to kill the cops in defense of themselves, but they're not going to be able to do it in 2 seconds, and this is madness, and blah, blah, blah. Cenk, what you're saying is madness. I don't know why you're talking about this. I don't know why this is the topic you decided to go with. I don't know what point you think you're making, but it's insane. You're insane. Cut it out. You're worrying me. Do I need to call a crisis intervention team? You might need some actual help.
And so, which then, of course, brings me back to the training. So it never occurred to the cops in Minnesota that if you're going into a situation like this, somebody might have a legal gun. They might be a legal gun owner, or you might have the wrong person.
Yeah, it did occur to the cops that they might be going into a place where somebody might have a gun. That's why they had their guns drawn. That's why they announced police search warrant over and over again. And on top of that, they got warrants for 3 different places where this suspect might have been because they thought they could be entering a non-hostile situation in any one of the 3. So everything you just said, Cenk, by all the police's actions are things that they considered. So you're just wrong in every way possible. But let's see where you go in this direction.
You heard all that stuff about Breonna Taylor case where it was the same exact scenario, but actually to Adrian's point, it took much longer, right? In the Breonna Taylor situation.
Cenk, the Breonna Taylor case was not the wrong address. Go look at the warrants. They have pictures of the drug dealer, Breonna Taylor's other boyfriend, removing packages from this apartment. They have Breonna Taylor going to one of the trap houses with the boyfriend, and this was 100% the correct address. There was a picture of Breonna Taylor's front door on the search warrant. Everything about it was accurate. And again, it wasn't even a no-knock warrant in the Breonna Taylor situation, or it wasn't executed as a no-knock warrant. They knocked, a cop was shot, and then they fired back. So your whole thing about the timing and how it's just like it, but it's also not just like it, is completely wrong. There's nothing just like the Breonna Taylor case except your propensity to lie about the facts of the case. And again, I just need to say this over and over again so you can understand this. There is no assertion that they were in the wrong place. It was just that Amir was the wrong person. Remember, the suspect is Amir's cousin. That's the person behind the murder. That's the person that they were looking for. We could ultimately end up finding out later, and I'm being extra cautious in the way that I'm talking about this, that he was in his cousin's apartment, which makes a lot of sense, or in a third relative that was hosting both of them in the apartment. This, for all intents and purposes, appears to be like the correct apartment out of the 3 apartments the police got search warrants for, because the murderer is the cousin of the person we're talking about.
Here, they shoot within 2 seconds, like they did with Tamir Rice, like they did with the Crawford and the Walmart shooting in Ohio. And so, can we please train the police not to execute people instantly? Oh, well, they had a gun. Well, yeah, of course, some of them are gonna have a gun.
No, Cenk, if they don't present the gun, if they don't point it at the police, then they don't get shot. Now, if they do point the gun at you, the police are not, and this will not be solved through training, going to say, I wonder if this person is pointing the gun at the officers because they're confused. I wonder if him confusedly firing the bullet into the officer will make that bullet less lethal for the officer. I wonder how I can determine all this nonsense in a split-second moment, even though we gave adequate notice to this person for him to not pick up the gun. They announced police search warrant over and over and over again. Remember how they said this was super relevant in the Breonna Taylor case? By the way, the police did announce in the Breonna Taylor case. They just deny that. But now, all of a sudden, it's not relevant. We're not even going to talk about it. We're not even going to talk about the way that they announced, something that theoretically they could have learned from the Breonna Taylor case, because it appears that the door was super thick in that case because Kenneth Walker didn't hear them and the officers didn't hear Kenneth Walker and Breonna Taylor on the other side. But sure, whatever, Cenk. We're just not even going to talk about that. We're just say Breonna Taylor, wrong address, innocent nurse. Wow, this guy did nothing wrong.
So is your idea, okay, we go into a house, if God forbid we have the wrong house or the wrong person, etc., let's just execute them and then sort it out later. That is their plan. That is their plan. They don't train them, oh, if there's a gun, and just in case, that might be the wrong person, or you should tell them to put your hands up.
Police search warrant! Police search warrant! Police search warrant!
They don't train them, oh, if there's a gun, and just in case, that might be the wrong person, or you should tell them to put your hands up.
First of all, that's exactly what they did, Cenk. They said hands, hands, police search warrant, police search warrant. They gave the commands that you're talking about right there. So you're just wrong. You're incorrect. You're not even close. And again, this is one of the benefits of not playing the video in full speed, because people in the audience who only get their information from the Young Turks won't know that Cenk is wrong and lying in this scenario. And by the way, the reason I say lying is because Cenk said he watched the actual speed video before the slow motion, and they decided to play this one. So he had to have heard them say hands, the exact thing that he's accusing them of not saying. But whatever, Cenk, who cares? Well, it doesn't matter. The police's plan, this is what he wants you to take away from this scenario, as if the Young Turks haven't inspired enough violence against police in the past, is to execute you and sort it out later.
You should wait for them to wake up, and hence you should have shields. You should go in a certain way. You have to give them a second and a half before you take their life. No, apparently there's no such training at all. The only thing we train cops to do is to execute people.
So if the police would have had shields, and you know that the Young Turks have done this in the past, they would have said, why are they so armed and so militarized in this scenario? Now, they may have had shields. Some of the officers I didn't really get a good look at during the course of the police doing this raid. But even if they did, Cenk would use that against them if he saw shields, because that's who Cenk is. He'd be like, you have a shield and you're worried about somebody pointing a gun at the cop. What's wrong with you? Why do you even have the shield? Maybe you should go in a different way, even though they go in and they spread out like you're supposed to try to clear a room, get all the possible angles to mitigate the risk against themselves, against other people, all that. But Cenk is going to tell them how to tactically go in next time. He's going to get around to it. Cenk's going to give out the police training manual. It's coming as soon as his new book is coming. You know, the one that he started selling and is not due until December of this year, or maybe they pushed it back to 2023, even though he started selling it like 2 years ago. It's coming. His training guide for the police, he's going to teach them that Cenk judo that he knows for sure.
You have to give them a second and a half before you take their life.
It's not like you couldn't do what the other lefties are doing, where you say 9 seconds or under 10 seconds or 10 seconds, not enough time for this person. But how much of the argument being put forward by the Young Turks rests on them compressing time to like 2 seconds in this instance? Cenk has done this multiple different times. It's been false every single time he's done it, yet he keeps emphasizing it, and now the time limit got shortened to 1.5 seconds. Eventually, we're going to say that the police literally opened the door and started firing, or maybe they fired as they were opening the door at this guy because they saw him sleeping, and black men aren't allowed to sleep in America. It's insane, but we're getting there. We're slowly moving up, inching close to this guy having no time and the police just standing over him and shooting him. And that gun that Cenk never even saw probably was planted by the police in his hand in the video. That's how fast the police moved in that scenario.
And it's interesting because they only seem to execute black people. But
it's interesting because they only seem to execute black people. Again, twice as many whites every single year. Twice as many whites every single year get killed by the police. Twice as many. So she's just wrong. That's just a lie. She couldn't even open her mouth fully to deliver that lie. But again, more nonsensical points from this person. I believe her name is Adrian, who adds nothing to the conversation except more falsehoods. It's like a competition on who can be more inaccurate and gin up more hysteria related to this story. But again, let's hear her out. Maybe she's going to bring us that 10,000 IQ point that we've just been waiting for.
When it comes to also this officer, it's like these officers, they said that Locke had pointed the gun at them. You can see in the video that that's not the case, to the extent that he had the gun and it was pointing anywhere. It was downward.
He was pointing the gun at one of the cops. You can actually see one of the officers bank around the kitchen and come around the side of the couch. That's where he raised up the gun. The idea that he was pointing it directly at the ground is nonsensical. It's just made up. That's not the case. Even if it was pointed downward, you can still point the gun at the lower half of somebody's body. I don't know if you guys know this, but cops aren't actually half men that float in the air when they decide to bank around the side. You can imply, you know for sure, that this guy who was on camera moved slightly out of frame. It's very easy to tell that, but she's just making stuff up.
Plus also, he only had a mere several seconds of a waking up. I can barely balance myself when I wake up. And especially with someone screaming and yelling at me and pointing a light in my face, like the man didn't even have a chance.
So he only had several seconds of waking up. I guess time is expanding right now. It's not like there's a video and there's a little timer on the video. It's not like YouTube. If you find the video on YouTube, you can actually do a timer and do some math and figure out that it's about 10 seconds. But we got 2 seconds, 1.5 seconds, several seconds, all these different time limits. And now we're going to hear about when she wakes up, she's super lethargic. They should have waited for him to get his coffee after he pointed the gun at them.
Like, the man didn't even have a chance to survive this encounter. And it continues to show you how often that essentially police do not intend for individuals to live.
Listen to the words that they choose very carefully. This isn't a bang bang situation where the guy points the gun, the cops react to that. Again, they're coming in on what they suspect to be a murder suspect. It's about the police not intending for them to live. The police planned it out this way. They had x-ray vision. They could see this guy sleeping on there. They knew he had a gun in his hand, and they baited him into grabbing the gun by saying, police search warrant, show me your hands, show me your hands, and then shooting him only when the gun was presented and pointed at one of the officers. It was all a part of the cops' sinister plan. Gosh darn, those cops are so racist.
Last thing, if the right wing wasn't so racist, they'd be 100% on our side on this issue. It's the jackbooted thugs of the government break into your house, you're a legal gun owner, and they murder you in 2 seconds.
You're innocent.
You're innocent. I mean, it's the right wing should be like as fervent as they have ever been in defense of Amir Locke. But he's black, so my guess is they, in a best case scenario, they won't say a word. In a normal case scenario, as Adrian alluded to earlier, they'll go now after he's dead, try to character assassinate Amir Locke and say, oh, no, it was worth it. It was justified. He's black, and I mean, he once had detention in junior high, and let's just try him now in the court of public opinion. So we applaud cops for killing black people. So that's likely what's going to happen, but at best you'll get neutrality. When if they had any principles at all, the right wing should be livid about this.
Cenk, again, you have no understanding about the principles of the conservatives. You have no understanding of what you talk about in any way, shape, or form. And you keep talking about how the right wing tries to demonize people by talking about how they had detention. No, people talk about your actions leading up to there. And when people try to make somebody out into an angelic figure in the press, they bring up your past actions in order to contradict that. This idea that we're going to smear this guy for what he did or what is in his past or whatever is not really relevant. Again, they were looking for his cousin. His cousin was the murderer, and the reason that he died is because he pointed the gun at police while they were executing a valid search warrant. They announced that they were the police. He may have reacted very poorly in that scenario. Maybe it was an instinctual reaction, but he pointed the gun at the cops. That's what ultimately led to his death. The culprit behind that is the cousin that committed the murder in the first place, which is why the police were executing the search warrant. It doesn't have to be an assassination of his character. You can acknowledge that it's actually quite sad if he didn't do anything wrong, didn't know about his cousin, and he ended up in this scenario. He just reacted. But you also have to point out that the facts of the case are what they are. And when you point a gun at police, no matter what race you are, and again, twice as many times it happens a year to white people than black people, you are likely to be shot by the police or dealt some level of force that could ultimately result in your death. This is not surprising in any way, but Cenk, you're the racist. Let me emphasize that again, because the only reason you're talking about this and not the twice as many cases that involved white people dying is because this person's black and you can make a racial argument based on it. And again, you can't address the facts. You keep saying 2 seconds, 2 seconds. The video's not 2 seconds long. Everybody knows that. They enter the apartment. It's about 10 seconds. That's why the overall narrative on the left is 9 seconds. So that's the Young Turks coverage of the Amir Locke case. Was it everything you expected? Was it as cringe as you were expecting? Was it as nonsensical? I sure think you got your money's worth with this video. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you liked the video, show me by leaving a like. Subscribe for more content. Follow me on all my social media. Support me via the support links. This has been me talking about yet another case brought up by the left. Till next time.